Hello and welcome to North Country Matters. My name is Donna Seymour. I'm a member of the St. Lawrence County League of Women Voters, one of the civic partners for this show. My guest today is Becky Preve. Becky is Executive Director of the Association on Aging in New York. She's here to talk about the impact the governor's budget cuts will have on the people her organization serves. Becky, welcome to North Country Matters. It is a pleasure to have you as our guest to talk about these really important issues.
It's great to be here, Donna. Thank you so much.
So let's start out by asking you to tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got involved with the Association on Aging in New York.
Sure. So I've worked in human services my entire career. I started out in children and family services and then transitioned into a social work position at a local hospital where I really focused on geriatric care, did a lot of work with the older population, found my passion there, then became the director of Franklin County Office for the Aging, where I served for a number of years. And that led itself to this state position advocating on behalf of the 59 offices for the aging throughout the state.
Okay, so that means as a resident of Franklin County, which is next door to our county in St. Lawrence, you're very familiar with the needs in rural New York. And so talk to us about who does the association serve?
So the association represents the 59 offices for the aging. They're also known federally as area associations on aging, so AAAs. We use those terms interchangeably. I run a not-for-profit membership organization that represents those 59 directors, who then contract with about 1,300 community-based organizations to provide services and supports predominantly for non-Medicaid eligible individuals, so individuals that are just above that low-income benchmark but cannot afford to privately pay for the service. And the 59 offices for the aging really provide a robust wraparound level of service, from home delivered meals to personal care services to health insurance information and counseling, legal assistance, information and assistance and referrals, and really work collectively to support the older population throughout the state and to really make sure that people are allowed to age with independence, autonomy, and dignity. And much of our focus, really, when I talk about the non-Medicaid eligible population, is if you look at the core services and supports that I spoke to, if you looked at the average client in the state of New York that's receiving those core services, that individual is a lower income female in their 80s that's managing 4 to 10 chronic conditions. And when I say chronic conditions, we're talking about congestive heart failure, COPD, diabetes, et cetera. We serve those individuals on average for about 6.5 years with wraparound programs and services for less than $10,000 per year on aggregate. And we know that absent those services that are provided through the local offices for the aging, those individuals will easily spend down to Medicaid and be pushed into institutional care like assisted living or skilled nursing facility placement, which costs on the Medicaid side of the system about $150,000 per year. So we're really the safety net provider, trying to allow individuals to remain in homes and communities, to keep them off Medicaid and really allow them to age healthily in their communities.
That is a tremendous service that you provide. I'm most familiar, of course, with our St. Lawrence County Office of the Aging. Andrea Montgomery, who's our director, has been a guest on the show before. So we've talked a lot about the kind of things that she can offer to people that live here in this county. The point you make about assisted living and nursing home is so important. We just lost here in St. Lawrence County our only assisted living facility, and it had to close because of funding. And so those 30 to 32 people have to find some other place. And those beds are just not available in the North Country because we don't have enough services to begin with. So this is really important. Becky, let's dive into the numbers that are associated with the budget. We know that older Americans are often invisible in our society, but nothing could be further from the truth in terms of their contributions to society, not only during their working lives, but during their retirement years. What's the reality?
I'm glad you raised that, Donna, because a lot of the work that we do through the association with our partners, New York State Office for the Aging, is to really try to combat ageism, because ageism is just as real as racism and sexism, all the other isms, and it's learned. So when you talk about the value of the older population, it's really important to look statewide. We have about 20 million people that live in the state of New York. We're rapidly approaching 5 million of those to be over the age of 60, but we also have 4.1 million caregivers in the state of New York. And so when you look collectively, that's about half of the state's population that's either aging themselves in that 60 plus cohort or is providing care for someone that's older with a disability. I kind of lay the framework there because it is a huge economic driver to have the older population live within your communities. So a couple statistics, and I know Andrea has referenced these in the past as well, but when you look at the older population, they support over 7 million jobs. They provide $462 billion in wages and income for the state. They represent 38% of the state tax base and 42% of the local county tax base. They pay $72 billion per year in state and local taxes. And if you look at the cost of caregiving provided by uncompensated caregivers, that's worth $39 billion per year. And if you look at their volunteerism, and specific to St. Lawrence County, Donna, a lot of the home delivered meals are actually delivered by local volunteers that are older themselves. If you had to pay volunteers at the fair market rate, it would be $13.8 billion that they contribute just in their volunteer activities. So I really like to talk about the fact that this is a very highly valued population, not only from an economic standpoint, but they bring such inherent intellectual value to the younger population through their lived experience and what they are allowed to provide. And we really talk about that because when you dive into the needs of the older population, there's a very small subset that actually need those services and supports that they have more than paid for. And when you look at the state budget and the fact that $72 billion per year are paid by older individuals, that's paying for our school systems, it's paying for our roads and bridges, they're paying for all the infrastructure that supports the holistic population. And that's why we really need to fight to make sure that those individuals that do need those services are able to get them.
That is such a true statement. You just mentioned Meals on Wheels. My parents were able to access Meals on Wheels, and the people that delivered it were exactly as you say, volunteers. And the Office for the Aging always can use more volunteers, no matter what county it is, because they provide such incredible services, not just the meals, but just that daily check to make sure that people are well and that they're okay in their own home. So yeah, those things are you can't put a price tag on them at all.
Well,
Because
I think a lot of people don't realize, Donna, and I'm glad you raised the home delivered meal program. That's not just a hot, healthy meal to receive every day. That's literally a lifeline for some of the older people that we serve. And the volunteer that comes to that home, they're the eyes and ears of the medical profession. They're at times the only individual that an older person may see. And I will tell you from, running an Office for the Aging next door and my partnership with Andrea Montgomery, people are found every single day that would either pass away alone or would not acknowledge a medical event had that volunteer not delivered the meal that day. So it's not just a meal, it is so much more than the meal. And I think that that's really important to underline, because when you look at people that are coming out of institutional care, many times a safe discharge plan includes having that daily interaction with the home delivered meal driver. So it's so incredibly important.
yeah, that's a good point. So just a few months ago, the state of New York made a big deal about creating their master plan on aging. They asked state residents to take a survey to find out more about their needs and living conditions. What happened to that survey and its findings?
So the survey closed very recently, so we have not seen a comprehensive assessment of that needs assessment survey. I will tell you that the Association on Aging, in partnership with the New York State Office for the Aging, about a year ago did a very comprehensive survey outside of the master plan for aging process. We really did this survey for local offices for the aging to do a needs assessment of their localized communities. That survey actually had over 27,000 responses, which is a huge response rate. I do not know what the response rate of the master plan for aging survey is, and we haven't seen the results of that. So that's something that we're waiting to see, because that will also influence decision-making in the years to come.
So one of the things that we know that Governor Hochul's 24 state budget does not reflect is the reality that's right now present on the ground for our aging population. And as you point out, it is the fastest growing segment of the state's population. What are some of the shortfalls that are this plan, this budget has that are really going to impact very negatively our seniors?
So unfortunately, we're extremely disappointed with the proposed executive budget, and that is for a variety of reasons. Number one is when you talk about the $72 billion per year that older people pay, and then you look at the New York State Office for the Aging budget, there's a significant disconnect. And the reason I say that is in the entire New York State budget, only 0.8% goes to older people. And I want to let that sink in. It is minuscule in comparison to the size of the overall state budget as at under $200 million. Of that $200 million, over 40% actually goes to New York City. So the remainder of the state has to utilize funds to support services. And not only did the proposed executive not take into account our current need, it actually cut $9.3 million in funding from last year for our core programs and services, and cut $2.5 million from the long-term care ombudsman program. And, Donna, you raised the assisted living issue in the North Country. We're seeing people from the North Country being sent 6-7 hours away from home to get skilled nursing facility care, which is a huge burden on the family. And when you look at that overall population in the state of New York, we only have about 165,000 nursing home beds in the entire state. So we know we have to look at home and community-based services to support individuals. And this budget proposal will actually cut people off those core programs and services. And what that means is someone that's receiving a home health aide maybe twice a week to take a bath or to have some housekeeping, we're going to have to cut those services if those budgetary line items aren't reinstituted. In addition to that, because the older population is growing, because skilled nursing facility beds are so hard to come by, we actually have waiting lists of over 18,000 services that are waitlisted in the state of New York today that will continue to grow. So again, we're extremely disappointed in the proposed executive. We're working really closely with our Assembly and Senate members to try and get one House appropriations back into the budget to be able to meet those needs. But collectively, the advocacy community has taken a very aggressive stance in the sense that you can't have a master plan for aging that's going to address aging needs for the next 10 years unless we fix the current state, which we need funding to do.
I think that people are still confused about the fact that we are not talking about expanding Medicaid here. We are actually talking about expanding services that are much, much easier and cheaper to deliver because they're being delivered in the home community by people who work in that community. So let's talk a little bit about that if we can, Becky, because that is a point that is so easily lost, I think.
It is. And, we do the exact opposite of Medicaid expansion. We prevent Medicaid. And the Medicaid program is wonderful and it serves a very specific purpose. But when you look at the Medicaid budget, right, the Medicaid budget is almost $100 billion in the state of New York. So it takes up the majority of the overall budget. And so we know we need to contain Medicaid costs. The way you contain Medicaid costs is exactly what you just spoke to. You invest in aging services because we support people that don't qualify for Medicaid. And what that means for a local individual that might be listening to this show, if you're a single individual and you make over, $1,600 or $1,700 per month, you can't access Medicaid. You're too high income, but you can't afford $35 to $40 an hour to pay for a home care worker to come to your home. That's where we fit in. We're serving those retired teachers, those retired healthcare workers, retired state employees that need services. And we're able to provide those to those non-Medicaid eligible individuals. If we can't provide the service based on the funding allocation, then we take steps to either spend that individual down to Medicaid by getting them a pooled trust, et cetera, or they're forced into an institutional setting where the only payment mechanism is either privately paying $150,000 per year, which a lot of people can't do, or we get you Medicaid coverage to pay for that care. So the only way to kind of contain this expanding Medicaid budget is to invest in the preventive side, which is the local offices for the aging. And the way I kind of encapsulate this for people that might not understand it is we learned years ago that if you could get into a school system and you could prevent kids from ever starting to smoke, you would save long-term healthcare costs. It's the same thing on the aging side. If you can invest in prevention on the front end to keep people healthy, to keep them engaged in their communities, they're never going to have to spend down to that Medicaid benchmark because we're going to have been able to serve them holistically. So when you look at the number of people on our waiting list that are awaiting those services, we know from our own New York State data, about 10% of them will go directly to a skilled nursing facility without ever touching another service infrastructure. We know 7% of them will spend down to Medicaid in the community. So an investment on the aging side will save hundreds of millions of dollars in Medicaid by making sure that people don't have to access that level of care.
The economics of this seem so clear cut. It's hard to understand why there are the cuts that are in the governor's budget when clearly that is the wrong approach to take when you're providing services. We know that keeping people in their homes, which is not only the best placement for them in terms of their comfort and security, with access to their family and friends, but there are other services that are not being funded adequately. Some of these services have actually been in place for about 50 years, and they just aren't receiving the input we need right now, particularly with the increase in the aging population. So what are some of those services that we're talking about here, Becky?
So, and I can say this is statewide, Donna, so it's not unique just to the North Country. The reasons for the issues are similar. It's based on funding. So we have wait lists across the state for home delivered meals, for transportation. Again, if you don't have Medicaid and you don't drive any longer, the only way you're going to get transportation to your specialty appointments like hemodialysis or cardiac care is through volunteer transportation programs. So home care services, absolutely, we have wait lists for. We have wait lists for health insurance counseling. We have wait lists for legal services. We have wait lists for pretty much any and all services that are provided through our network. And again, that's directly due to the budgetary issues that I mentioned. And in addition to the wait list, which is obviously a very large issue in the state of New York, you have to look collectively at the overall budget and where other cuts happen that will then impact our service infrastructure. So the cuts to the home care service infrastructure network to the tune of millions of dollars is going to impact our service infrastructure. The cuts to skilled nursing facilities and Medicaid reimbursement to facilities will absolutely impact us as well. So it's not just one line item that gets neglected in the budget that's going to push older people to our network. It's all of those things collectively that then have, I call it a house of cards. You pull one out and you see everything kind of crumble. So we're really disappointed not only in the aging budget, but also what's happening to skilled nursing facilities for individuals that do need to reside in the skilled nursing facility because there is that need available. So it's really widespread. Our wait lists in and of themselves need about a $51 million investment for us to be able to address those. Overall, we're asking for an additional $252 million to be put into the New York State Office for the Aging budget to finally right size our service infrastructure to meet the needs of the older population.
Wow, that is a very sobering thing to learn. So, and you mentioned a little bit about the cuts to home care. I've done 2 shows already this spring on that issue in particular, but clearly your agency cannot provide the services that are needed without people to do the work, which is the home care workers. What needs to happen to reverse these disastrous cuts and get the budgetary support needed to address the needs in our communities?
So I'm glad that you have covered this, Donna. A lot of news outlets have, because the home care worker crisis is the worst in the nation. So unfortunately, the lack of home care workers is a direct reflection of what we pay those workers. And so I argue, and I will always argue, that home care workers, whether you call them, home health aides or personal care aides, they're individuals that are going into people's homes and they're assisting with bathing, toileting, dressing, meal preparation, etc. That is some of the hardest work that exists in the state of New York, and it's not valued. It's valued by human services workers. It's valued by the licensed home care agencies, but it's not valued from a fiscal standpoint. So, I acknowledge the fact that these individuals that are going into homes, and specific in the North Country, many times they're not paid for time on the road. They have to have a reliable vehicle with snow tires. They don't have a reliable work schedule if someone goes into a nursing home or to a hospital. Really, really difficult work. And they're paid barely above minimum wage. So when you take that same worker that can go to either Walmart or a grocery store and make the same amount of money with a set work schedule, just based on the needs of their families, they're going to take those jobs. So it's a really special individual that becomes a home care worker. We know the solution. The solution has been around for many years. I would argue, when you talk about the home care worker shortage and issue, in 1987, it was on the front page of the New York Times. Here we are in 2024 having the same conversation and the same needs. We have to pay these workers a fair living wage. So about 3 years ago, Fair Pay for Home Care was introduced through Senator May and her leadership. And it has repeatedly been proposed. It's repeatedly been vetoed. And basically, Fair Pay for Home Care is paying a home care worker 150% of the regional minimum wage. So that would look between $20 and $24 per hour for the aide to actually get paid. And we know it would cost the state money. So data analytics indicate that would cost about $4 billion to implement, but the state would reap about $7 billion in economic spillover effect of aides coming off of public assistance, being able to come off Medicaid themselves, what they would pay for in goods and services in the community. They could buy homes at that level, et cetera. So, Fair Pay for Home Care hasn't gotten the traction that it needs. We're now really talking about reinvesting in long-term care infrastructure and network. And the bottom line is you have to pay these workers enough money to get them off a benefit cliff. So if you're going to lose, SNAP food assistance and Medicaid, you have to make enough to purchase those privately. And you have to pay them to compete with hospitality and other retail opportunities because the work that they're doing is so incredibly important.
My last guest talking about this was Alana Berger from the Caring Majority, and she said 58% of home care workers actually receive county benefits because they
Absolutely.
do not make enough money to live on the job that they have. And that is just not right in so many ways in our state, because we should be able to find that money. And in fact, according to what I've learned, $3 billion is being wasted because it's going through the private insurance, who are doing absolutely nothing to actually provide these services except sucking off the public dollars. So this is, these are things that have to be addressed, and they can't take forever to solve, can they? Because the need is immediate, the need is growing, and we all agree that the Medicaid budget can't get any bigger. So there has to be a way to put that kind of money in a more productive way. And this certainly sounds like what you are talking about. It's far more productive and far more economical.
Well, I'll also share with you, Donna. So, there's a ton of conversation about these MLTC plans and where the dollars actually flow. Because if you look at the licensed home care provider network, over 50% of the licensed home care provider network are actually in negative operating budgets. So this isn't an issue at the not-for-profit level that's paying these aides. It goes much higher than that. And so if you want to look at a model that works, I'll share with you, we have 14 counties in the state of New York that, because we could not get home health aides for our clients, the Offices for the Aging actually directly employed the home health aide. So that aide then becomes a county employee that has access to a county vehicle. They get paid time off, vacation, sick time, et cetera. They're part of a care team, so they feel very engaged with the individuals that they're serving. And they're paid well above what a licensed home care provider entity can pay them. And what we've seen in those 14 counties is they're able to address their waiting list for home care. They have huge client and worker satisfaction. We've seen amazing retention of the aides that are employed through the AAA network. And so if you want a model that works, it's paying them, giving them access to those services and supports and county benefits to do exactly what you just spoke to get them off being dependent on public service benefits and to really make them feel like a valued member of the care team. Because I would argue, of everyone that touches an older individual or someone with a disability in the community, if a home health aide raises an issue or concern, I take that with more heart than hearing it from a physician or another practitioner, because these home health aides are literally the family that are going in to support these individuals. And at the end of the day, the only way to contain the huge costs of forcing people into institutional care is to provide them robust home and community-based services. And that includes the home health aides that provide those.
You have outlined the solution let's hope that somebody's listening, because that makes so much sense to provide those services directly and actually pay the people who are doing them a living wage. One of the things that I wanted to chat with you for a minute about, Becky, was on November 5th, voters in New York State are going to have the chance to flip their ballots and vote for the New York State Equal Rights Amendment to the Constitution. That amendment adds specific protections to the Constitution for the elderly and the disabled. How important will it be for the people in that your organization advocates for that amendment to pass?
It is hugely important, Donna, and I'm so glad you raised it, because again, to get this protection under the Constitution underlines exactly what we talked about today, is to make sure that older people, people with disabilities, have the same access and rights as the general population. And quite frankly, I argue that that's something that all of us should support, because if we're all blessed, we're going to become older, and we should be afforded those same rights. And I will say this. I recently had a conversation with a colleague when I said, at what numerical age or at what point using an assistive device, either a cane or a wheelchair, do you become invisible? Because older people and people with disabilities feel completely invisible. And I want the answer to that be never. And this is a mechanism in order which we can actually make that happen, by making sure constitutionally we have the same rights afforded to those populations as the general population.
You make an excellent point. So remember to flip your ballots in November and vote yes, because you're exactly right. If everything goes well, we're all going to be in that boat someday, and we want to be in a boat where people are actually paying attention to us. Becky, thank you so much for coming in today. I really appreciate what you've had to say. I appreciate the work your organization is doing and the advocacy, because right now that is critical. If we are going to make the changes that need to be made in this budget for this year, so that this 25% of the population can get the services they need, we need to do this right now. So thank you so much for your work and your advocacy.
Thank you, Donna.
All right. These conversations are a production of North Country Matters. This show is a civic collaboration between the League of Women Voters of St. Lawrence County and the Potsdam Public Library. Until next time, remember, our North Country matters, and so do our seniors.